She was one of cinema's most luminous talents, a three-time Academy Award nominee, from the iconic West Side Story to the rebellious rebel without a cause. Natalie Wood represented grace, intelligence, and undeniable screen presence. At 43 years old, she should have had decades of remarkable performances ahead of her. Instead, her career ended on a cold November night in 1981 under circumstances that remain deeply troubling and persistently unexplained. More than 4 decades later, Natalie Wood drowned off Catalina Island on Thanksgiving weekend, 1981, and the official story has never quite added up. What was supposed to be a relaxing yacht trip with her husband became the mystery that would define her legacy, overshadowing the brilliance of her performances and captivating public imagination for generations. Tonight, we're examining the complete timeline of that fateful night, the medical evidence that transformed understanding of her death, the witness accounts that contradict official narratives, and the investigation that has been reopened again, and remains fundamentally unresolved. This is the story of Natalie Wood's death, and it's far more complex and troubling than most people realize. Before we examine the mystery of her death, we must understand who Natalie Wood was and why her loss mattered so profoundly. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20, 1938. In San Francisco to Russian immigrant parents, Natalie's path to stardom began remarkably early. At just 4 years old, she appeared in a film called Happy Land, credited only to fate and circumstance. Her mother, Maria, pushed her daughter toward entertainment with single-minded determination. Natalie became a child star, working consistently through her childhood while most children were playing. By her teenage years, she'd already accumulated significant film experience and was recognized as a talented young actress with considerable potential. Her breakthrough into significant roles came in her teens. She received her first Academy Award nomination at just 17 for her performance in Rebel Without a Cause, starring opposite James Dean. The nomination validated what many already suspected. This young woman possessed serious dramatic talent that transcended typical Hollywood starlet material throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Wood solidified her reputation through carefully chosen roles. She starred in the musical adaptation of West Side Story, playing Maria with grace and authenticity. She appeared in Splendour in the Grass, working with legendary director Elia Kazan. She demonstrated remarkable range, comfortable in musicals, dramas, and comedies alike. By the 1970s and early 1980s, Wood remained active and relevant. She was filming a science fiction thriller called Brainstorm with respected actor Christopher Walken. She was also dealing with the complexities of maintaining a career while managing 2 daughters from different marriages and a remarriage to actor Robert Wagner, her first husband whom she'd reconnected with and married again in 1972. Wood was complex, a woman who'd been pushed into the spotlight as a child but had developed genuine artistry, who managed significant family responsibilities while maintaining professional ambitions, who navigated Hollywood's demands with intelligence and determination. She was 43 years old, still working, still relevant, still living a full life. Then everything changed. On Thanksgiving weekend 1981, Natalie Wood and her husband Robert Wagner decided to take a trip aboard their yacht. The Splendour anchored off Catalina Island near Los Angeles. Wood had been working on her film, and the weekend trip was intended as a chance for relaxation. She invited friends to join them, but most declined due to unfavorable sailing weather. The people aboard the yacht that night were Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, actress and actor Christopher Walken, and Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain. The group enjoyed an evening on shore, dining at a restaurant called Doug's Harbor Reef on Catalina Island. Around 8 to 9 p.m., they consumed significant amounts of alcohol during the meal. The restaurant manager later expressed concern about how intoxicated all 4 appeared when they departed around 10 p.m. The group returned to the Splendour using an inflatable dinghy called the Prince Valiant. What happened next is where the official story becomes complicated and contested. According to the initial account, Wood went to bed in the couple's cabin around 10:45 p.m., while the men remained on deck talking. As the evening progressed, there was an argument between Wagner and Walken. The exact nature and severity of this argument would become one of the central disputed facts of the case. Initial accounts downplayed it as minor disagreement. Later accounts, particularly from Captain Davern, suggested it was far more heated. At approximately 11 p.m., Wagner went below to the cabin to join his wife, expecting to find her asleep. Instead, he discovered she was not in the cabin. More significantly, the inflatable dinghy that had been tied to the yacht was also missing. Wood was gone. Wagner alerted Davern. The two men began searching, and eventually they made contact with the harbor patrol to report a missing person. A search was initiated, but during critical hours of darkness, no organized effort was mounted with urgency. A key witness, Marilyn Wayne, who was on another boat anchored roughly 80 feet away, reported hearing a woman screaming between 11 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., crying out that she was drowning and begging for help. Her calls for assistance went unanswered. It wasn't until 1:30 a.m. that Wagner called the harbor master to report his wife missing. The Coast Guard wasn't notified until 3:30 a.m. The delay in seeking help would become another central point of contention in the investigation. Early the next morning, around 8 a.m. on November 29th, Natalie Wood's body was found floating in the water approximately 1 mile from the yacht. She was wearing a red down jacket, a flannel nightgown, and wool socks. Her body was recovered from the water and taken to the coroner's office for examination. Los Angeles. County Coroner Thomas Noguchi conducted the autopsy. His initial findings seemed straightforward. Natalie Wood had drowned accidentally. The official narrative that emerged was that Wood, perhaps seeking solitude or attempting to secure the dinghy that was making noise against the hull, had gone on deck alone in the dark. She'd either attempted to board the dinghy or attempted to tie it off and had slipped in the dark water, drowning as a result. However, the autopsy report noted details that didn't perfectly align with this simple narrative. The coroner documented bruises on Wood's body. He noted abrasions and scratches. The severity and pattern of these injuries raised questions about how exactly they'd been sustained. Despite these medical findings, Noguchi's official conclusion was accidental drowning. No foul play was suspected. The investigation was closed by December 11, 1981. The case was deemed solved, filed away, and the world moved on, mourning a talented actress while accepting a simple explanation for her death. But Noguchi himself seemed to harbor doubts. 2 years later, in his 1983 book titled Coroner, he raised questions about the original narrative. He posed queries that investigations should have pursued. Why had Wood gone on deck alone in the middle of the night? Where exactly was she going? Why had it taken so long for the men on the yacht to realize she was missing? These questions simmered for 3 decades, unanswered and largely unexamined by official investigations. The case remained closed. The victim was buried, her family grieved, and most of the world accepted the official story. But doubt lingered among people closest to the situation. For nearly 3 decades, Dennis Davern, the captain of the Splendour that night, remained largely silent. He gave minimal statements to police and never publicly detailed what he'd witnessed. But the weight of keeping quiet eventually became unbearable. In 2000, Davern began speaking to journalists, particularly with Vanity Fair. Revealing details that contradicted the official narrative, Davern detailed a very different sequence of events from what had been officially reported. He described a significantly more heated argument between Wagner and Walken than had been acknowledged. According to Davern, at one point during the argument, Wagner smashed a wine bottle on a table and shouted at Walken an accusatory question about his relationship with Wood. The argument was intense, heated, and emotionally charged. Wood, disturbed by the conflict, had gone to bed. Wagner eventually went to join her, and according to Davern, the couple had their own confrontation in the cabin. The sounds of their argument could be heard from elsewhere on the boat. Davern alleged that Wagner later instructed him not to turn on the searchlights when Wood was discovered missing, a detail that seemed to suggest knowledge that searching would be futile. In 2009, Davern published a book titled Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendour, providing an extended account of what he claimed to have witnessed. He revealed that he'd initially provided a sanitized version of events to investigators and had been living with the guilt of his silence for decades. 2 years later, in November 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department announced it was reopening the investigation into Natalie Wood's death. The decision came after more than 700 people, including entertainment professionals and investigators, signed a petition requesting that the case be Davern's revelations and the new interest. from media had apparently created enough momentum for authorities to take another look. The reopening of the case raised new questions and new hopes that answers might finally be found. Investigators conducted fresh interviews with people who had information about that night. They examined physical evidence with modern forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 1981, began questioning assumptions that had gone unexamined for 3 decades. In July 2012, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office took a significant action. They officially amended Natalie Wood's death certificate. The cause of death was changed from accidental, drowning to drowning, and other undetermined factors. The manner of death was changed from accident to undetermined. This change was far more significant than a mere administrative adjustment. It represented an official acknowledgement that the original determination had been incomplete or potentially incorrect. The coroner's office cited the need for closer examination of the bruising on Wood's body. A supplementary autopsy report noted the presence of bruises and abrasions on her forearms, wrists, knees, neck, and face that hadn't been fully analyzed in the original autopsy. The key question that emerged was timing. When had these injuries been inflicted? If they occurred before Wood entered the water, they suggested struggle or violence. If they occurred as she was drowning or after death, they might be consistent with natural causes. However, the coroner's office indicated that some of the bruising appeared consistent with injuries sustained before entering the water. An intern who worked in the coroner's office at the time later described some of the injuries as troubling, suggesting patterns more consistent with assault than accidental slipping and falling. This characterization added significant weight to theories that something more sinister than a simple accident might have occurred. The change to the death certificate was not a definitive answer, but it was a significant acknowledgement that the original investigation had been inadequate. The case could no longer be classified as a solved mystery. It was now formally classified as unsolved, an acknowledgement that would reverberate through media and public consciousness and reignite theories about what had really happened that night. As the investigation continued, investigators began focusing more closely on Robert Wagner. In February 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department took an unprecedented step. They officially named Wagner as a person of interest in his wife's death. This designation, though not equivalent to being charged or even formally suspected of a crime, nevertheless represented a significant development. Designation was based on interviews with new witnesses, people who had lived near the dock where the Splendour was berthed, and who had information about Wagner's statements and actions. Some details from these new interviews suggested that the timeline Wagner had provided might not be entirely accurate, or that his account of events might require further scrutiny. Wagner's attorney responded with a statement asserting that her client had fully cooperated with investigators over the years, had been interviewed multiple times, and had answered every question posed to detectives. The statement also characterized attempts to exploit the tragedy as inappropriate and disrespectful to the family. Wagner initially agreed to further interviews as part of the renewed investigation, but later declined to continue. Speaking with detectives, he exercised his legal right to remain silent and did not provide additional statements or clarifications to investigators. Investigators publicly stated their desire to speak further with Wagner, but acknowledged that they could not compel him to do so. He had legal rights that protected him from being forced to provide additional testimony. As of the most recent updates, Wagner has not provided new statements addressing the specific questions raised by the reopened investigation. This development created a complex situation. Wagner was named as a person of interest, based on interviews with others, but he was not formally accused of any crime. No charges were filed, and investigators were unable to force him to provide additional information. The case remained unresolved, with significant questions unanswered. Beyond the official investigation, multiple theories and narratives about that night have circulated. Natalie Wood's sister, Lana Wood, has publicly disputed the accidental drowning conclusion. Lana has been one of the most vocal skeptics of the official story, maintaining for decades that the circumstances surrounding her sister's death don't align with what authorities have concluded. Lana has noted that Natalie had a lifelong documented fear of dark water. She'd expressed this fear repeatedly to friends and family. She was not a strong swimmer. The idea that she would voluntarily go out onto the deck alone, in the dark, unsecured, in nightclothes, seems inconsistent with her documented personality and phobias. Additionally, Lana has questioned why Natalie would be found fully clothed in a down jacket and socks with her nightgown, a peculiar combination that doesn't align with the narrative of someone who went to bed and then slipped on deck. How would she have gotten the jacket if she was already in the water? Christopher Walken, the third person on the boat, has remained largely silent publicly, but has offered limited commentary. In a 1997 interview with Playboy, he suggested that Wood was perhaps half asleep when she slipped, hit her head, and fell from the dinghy. This account aligns more with the official narrative. Though it doesn't address the questions about bruising and timing of injuries, Robert Wagner, in his 2008 memoir, addressed the night's events, stating that he and Walken had argued, and that when he went to bed, he discovered his wife and the dinghy missing. He acknowledged that nobody knows exactly what happened and speculated that she was either trying to get away from the argument or attempting to secure the dinghy. However, this memoir statement doesn't address questions about the argument's severity, the delay in reporting her missing, why he allegedly instructed the captain not to turn on searchlights, or explanations for the bruising found on her body in 2020. HBO released a documentary titled Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind. The documentary brought renewed attention to the case and featured an on-camera conversation between Wood's daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner, and Robert Wagner himself. Addressing the speculation and theories about her mother's death, Natasha expressed her belief in Wagner's account of events and characterized him as courageous for revisiting the painful subject. She credited him with being supportive during her grief after her mother's death. However, the documentary also presented the alternative theories and questions that have persisted over decades, introducing audiences to the complexity of a case that remains officially unresolved. The documentary sparked renewed public interest, with streaming audiences exposed to details and theories they might not have been aware of previously. Social media discussions about the case increased. Petitions for further investigations circulated, and the mystery once again became a topic of cultural conversation. This public interest has maintained pressure on authorities to continue their investigation, though progress has been limited by the passage of time, the death of key witnesses, and the memory limitations that naturally occur over decades, as nearly 5 years have passed since Natalie Wood's death. Numerous fundamental questions remain unanswered. The exact sequence of events that night, what happened in the argument, who said what precipitated the decision's major remains unclear and contested. The precise timing of Wood entering the water is unknown, making it impossible to definitively determine when bruises and injuries were sustained. The cause of the bruising remains medically undetermined, with experts unable to conclusively state whether injuries occurred before, during, or after drowning. The delay in reporting Wood missing 2.5 hours between her disappearance and notifying the harbor master has never been adequately explained. Why did it take so long? What were the men aboard the yacht doing during those hours? Were rescue efforts intentionally delayed? The witness testimony of Marilyn Wayne, who heard screams for help between 11 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., has never been fully integrated into an official narrative. If those screams were indeed Wood calling for help, they establish a timeline that raises questions about the official story, the circumstances of Wood's clothing and appearance when found the down jacket over her nightgown, the socks. The specific bruising patterns have never been satisfactorily explained in terms consistent with a simple accidental drowning narrative. Perhaps most significantly, no one has ever been held accountable or charged in connection with Wood's death. Despite decades of investigation, despite the reopening of the case, despite the designation of a person of interest, no criminal charges have been filed against anyone. Natalie Wood's death remains one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries. It's a case that has captivated public imagination for nearly 5 decades, spawned books, documentaries, and countless articles, and continues to generate debate and speculation. What makes the case so enduring is not just the mystery itself, but what it represents. Questions about accountability, about the power dynamics between established figures and those in vulnerable positions, about whether fame and status can shield someone from consequences. For those who knew Natalie Wood, her daughters, her family, her friends, the persistence of the mystery has meant living with uncertainty and pain that never fully resolves. Her legacy, remarkable though her film career was, has been overshadowed by the questions surrounding her death. The investigation officially remains open. Time, however, continues to pass. Witnesses age and die. Memory fades. Evidence degrades. The likelihood of definitive answers diminishes with each passing year. What seemed solvable in 1981 becomes exponentially more challenging with each passing decade. Natalie Wood deserves to be remembered for her talents, her performances, and her contributions to cinema. But until the questions surrounding her death are fully answered, that mystery will remain part of her story, a tragic epilogue to a life that should have included many more chapters.